It's not very common for you to see an artist go platinum without any features on his album. Yo guys, what's up? My name is Judge Prime, the ITK, here again with another comparison video. Today we are talking about J. Cole. More specifically, we'll be taking a look at two of his most recent albums, Born Sinner and 2014 Forest Hills Drive. And I'm sorry I've been very inconsistent with this series, but I'll try and be more consistent from now on. Shout out to He Dear for recommending I do a video on this. So J. Cole, an artist who I'm sure most of you are familiar with. In case you're not, he is a rapper from North Carolina. Also, J. Cole as an artist is also a very talented producer, something I feel he has over his contemporaries, who is often compared with Drake and Kendrick Lamar. He has produced for Kendrick Lamar High Power, one of my all-time favorite Kendrick Lamar tracks. So I think that is something that is worth mentioning whenever the argument of J. Cole versus Kendrick comes up. If you're a Cole fan, just remind them that he's a very talented producer, more talented than Kendrick Lamar. So let's talk about these two albums, starting with Born Sinner. Now, Born Sinner is J. Cole's second album. The normal version of this album has 16 tracks, whereas the deluxe version has 21 tracks. On this album, I get this very dark and sinister vibe throughout it. On this album, though, you still feel like J. Cole feels he has a lot to prove on there. You do feel these occasional touches here and there of very well thought out and structured pop or chart friendly tracks, and we're going to go through and talk about some of the tracks on this album. So looking at some of the tracks on this, the album opens with the track of Illuminati. Very grand opening on this track. You have lovely violins, you have boom bap production, something that I think J. Cole loves. You see it replicated on a number of his tracks throughout his discography. He talks about bragging like Hove or Jay-Z, and also being a little bit more technical at times and being deeper. Just being a very versatile rapper, I guess, is the overall theme of this track. A very enjoyable track and a nice way to introduce or to begin this album. Next track, Land of Snakes. This feels like a prelude. There are a couple of tracks actually on this album that feel like preludes to Wet Dreams, obviously, of his next album, which I'll be talking about shortly. And basically he talks about sneaking in girls and living with his older brother and wanting to move out. I think this track, and I can see this track being a reason why people say J. Cole can be corny at times. He often talks about his sexual experiences with girls from his, adolescent years. The next track, Power Trip, which is a track I would like to think was, a bit more chart friendly, a track that is one of my simp anthems from my secondary school years, a track that I listened to frequently. Very nice and smooth track, talking about a girl that has him up all night, singing love songs, just reflecting on, a girl that he might have left behind in his past and how he's grown as an artist and whether she still remembers him. This also features Miguel, an artist who I'm also a huge fan of, and it was my first introduction to Miguel. Again, lovely boom bap production, very reflective, very immersive, very simpy. I'd like to say this is one of those simp ballads from J. Cole, and very enjoyable track. The next track, More Money, basically, talks about black people or African Americans or Africans in general being unable to hold money or keep money. And he talks about billionaires. On this album, you see J. Cole sort of have an obsession with billionaires. The next track, Trouble, you have more sinister production on this track. You have a very lovely choir also featured on this track. Runaway, I think, is a track that illustrates his singing ability. And then another track, Rich Niggas, a very reflective track, very simpy, very in your feelings. You have these raindrops in the background. You have this nice harp instrumentation, very lovely track. And he says, he doesn't like rich niggas and rappers that only talk about money and bitches and don't really talk about anything meaningful. Throughout this album, you see J. Cole sort of take shots at everybody. Something J. Cole does quite frequently is take shots at everybody, but also sort of see himself as a pioneer or a leader sort of this more conscious artist or this more conscious rapper. The next track, Forbidden Fruit, one of the only collaborations between J. Cole and Kendrick Lamar, the others being, the Black Friday collaboration they did. But Forbidden Fruit is a very nice and jazzy track, lovely bass on this track. And basically on this track, it talks about love. It's very lustful, very sexy. He's also saying, nothing lasts, whether it's money, women, or love. I like the hook. The hook, I think, is the most appealing part of this track. It's kind of a shame that Kendrick didn't really rap, but he did, give a very dope hook. I think this is one of the better collaborations in general in hip hop between these two artists. Certainly, I think they have great chemistry together and they have good taste. I think they work well together. Looking at High Powered track that J. Cole produced for Kendrick Lamar, one of the most iconic Kendrick Lamar songs in general. Next track that I found interesting, Crooked Smile, talks about being imperfect, how he's rich now and how people say he should fix his teeth, but he's like, up until this point he's lived with it, so why does he need to fix these imperfections and this chase of cosmetic beauty that he's not really a fan of. And something that I appreciate, something that I can relate to as an individual who has had some difficulties, especially within my dental history. Another track on here, Let Nas Down. Probably one of the tracks that makes me respect J. Cole so much is because he sampled Fela, the legendary Fela. And as many people might know, I am a huge Fela fanboy. Fela, obviously the legendary Nigerian artist who is a pioneer of Nigerian music. He samples Fela's track Gentleman. That's the saxophone you hear in the background of this track. And basically on this track, he talks about how he let Nas down. He had released the track Workout, which was his attempt at getting a chart-friendly track, a track which did very well for J. Cole, but how Nas had listened to this track and wasn't a huge fan of it, didn't appreciate it, and this was sort of told to him by a producer by the name of No ID. He had let down his mentor Nas, and this was sort of like an apology, I'm sorry for letting you down type of track, and sort of him taking up the mantle of, the conscious rapper, the savior almost of hip hop on this track. And I will say on this album, you get the story of a young man's progression, a young man dealing with success and fame, a young man sort of understanding what his purpose is, not just as an individual, but within the industry or the hip hop culture, and, sort of rising up to that mantle. You still feel that he isn't completely comfortable with what he wants to do. He's still finding himself and he still feels like he has a lot to prove on this album. So now that we're done with Born Sinner, we'll start talking about Forest Hills Drive. Now, to me, the most interesting thing about J. Cole is how he progressed within that 1 or 2 years between Born Sinner and Forest Hill Drive. Like I said, Born Sinner feels like an artist who is starting to get accustomed to who he is and what his role is, whereas Forest Hill Drive, you get the sense of a very calm, very mature, and very fulfilled almost J. Cole. As I said, he had no features on this and was able to go platinum. Sort of to drift off topic, this tells a lot of artists, I would like to believe, that you don't necessarily have to have a chart-friendly track for you to do well. He went platinum without any track that you could say is a particular banger, without any big feature on it, even though he did have feature a choir on a couple of tracks, but there's nothing on here that is really eye-grabbing. It's just him, his music, and his production as well. It's sort of a solo mission, and saying, here I am, this is J. Cole, this is my story, this is who I am, and this is what I want to do. So J. Cole on this album is very comfortable with himself, and I'm going through some of the tracks. The intro, nice, very nice, soulful, lovely piano ballads on this. You have the next track, January 28th. Here on this track, basically J. Cole talks about, the black communities, how there are no black heroes except, basketball stars and rappers. The next track, Wet Dreams, a track which I can relate to, a track which a lot of people might find corny. I think it's that sort of tinge of corniness that a lot of people find or admire about J. Cole. And on this track, you know, it's more of a sentimental track. You have this sort of retro beat on this track, and he tells you the story of a girl he liked in math class and his first sexual experience. He does tell the story in quite an explicit manner, but it is a compelling and interesting and fun story, a story that a lot of adolescents and young adults can relate to and enjoy. In fact, adults in general can enjoy this track. The next track, Adolescents, very interesting track on here. You have a nice orchestral introduction to the track, very smooth, reflective beat, and basically he's reflecting upon his teenage years, going to high school, how he had this one friend who he looked up to in a way, who was, you know, in the streets, and how he had a conversation with him one time saying, you know, put me on to what you're doing. And then his friend was taken aback and was like, you have a stable family, you have the prospect of going to college, you are everything I want in my life, and you're looking up to me. Do you know how stupid you sound? And sort of how this had prompted J. Cole to sort of be thankful for everything he has in his life, and be thankful to his mother, how they had moved from, you know, the trailer park to having a home for themselves. And I think the most important story on this track is for you, the listener or the viewer that's watching this review, to sort of take a step back. Even though you want a lot of things, we want a lot of things, but to be thankful that your life is better than a lot of people's. Like, you may have a roof over your head, you certainly have internet access, so your life is better than a lot of people who might be on the streets, who don't have parents, who don't have a family to take care of them. So no matter how much you want, always take that step back to be thankful for what you already have. This album has a lot of great stories, a lot of great reflection, a lot of meaning to it, and it is a very compelling story, a story I love. One thing I love about rappers is when they open up and tell you their story, and you sort of feel this personal connection. The next track, A Tale of Two Cities, I would say this track is it has more banging production on it, and you know, what he wanted to have as a youth, or who he wanted to be as a youth, and coming to realize that the world is bigger than it actually seemed to him. The next track, Fire Squad, this track was a little bit controversial because of his comments of, you know, cultural appropriation about Justin Timberlake, Elvis, and, you know, Macklemore, and how, you know, he would go to the Grammys and, what awards? I think it was a Grammy, and, you know, Iggy Azalea would win a Grammy and he'd just smile, even though he isn't hating and he's joking, but there is some truth to it. This was seen as being a bit controversial. But again, you know, J. Cole, in a funny way, gets away with throwing shots at a lot of people, but still being able to not receive that kind of backlash, in my opinion. And the outro of this track, you know, basically J. Cole is saying we are all kings, and he sort of takes shots at people who feel like, or need to keep saying that they're the best or they're the king, because it reflects a certain insecurity. It also says, you know, J. Cole is going to take that crown and destroy it because we are all kings in our own right. I think that had a lot of meaning to it. And I think that's a particular line or a particular aspect of this album that is often overlooked. Next track, State Troopers, very ethereal, dreamy track. Very chill and laid back. And this is the type of track, you know, you just hit a blunt with your friends and, you know, just reflect on life. GOMD, or Get Off My Dick, probably one of my favorite tracks on this album. Sick instrumental, lovely bridge. This part, you know, the first part is okay, but when he says, you know, this is the part that the thugs skip, I think that's where the real meaning and juice of this track is. Basically on this, he's talking about, you know, how, you know, nobody's talking about real love anymore, and, you know, singing about love, and also talking about stereotypes, why every rich black nigga has to be famous, why every broke black nigga has to be brainless. I think what is also the most interesting part of this is also the music video that accompanies this track, where you see a depiction of what would then be termed a house nigga, basically a lighter skinned or a mixed person of African descent, being in the house, not being in the fields. and how the need for solidarity between whether you're light skinned, dark skinned, whether you're African American or African in general, and how the house nigger was able to lead the rebellion and arm the other brothers, and sort of, you know, despite him trying to have that solidarity and trying to say, you know, we are all one, that he wasn't seen as being part of the community because they always perceived that he was, you know, in a better position than them. But when he was able to help them rebel against their oppressor, he was then, you know, part of the community. So the next track, No Role Models, basically, as the name implies, talking about how there are no role models within the community. Apparently a nice reflection on how his mum had lost her house and how he was unaware of this. You know, he was busy in New York chasing fame and women, and how he sort of beats himself up for being so selfish about that. The album closes with the track Note to Self, which, you know, functions as a sort of thank you. He thanks everybody involved in the creative process. He also thanks the fans. He shouts out people like Drake, Kendrick Lamar, and Wale, you know, his competitors, his peers, who still have genuine love for him. So overall, let's look at comparing the two. I would say in terms of production, while Born Sinner does have, you know, a lot of banging beats, it is more sinister. But I would say Forest Hill Drive, in my opinion, has a lot more laid back, well thought out production that is quite cohesive, that ties together with the general theme and mood of the album. So I would give production to Forest Hill Drive. In terms of versatility, you do see a lot more versatility on Born Sinner. You have more chart-friendly tracks, you have more braggadocious J. Cole, whereas on Forest Hill Drive, you see a more reflective and subdued J. Cole. Also looking at, you know, maybe lyricism, I would say there's a lot more depth and content in Forest Hill Drive. In my opinion, I will say that Forest Hill Drive is the better album. You do see a phenomenal amount of growth from J. Cole between Born Sinner and Forest Hill Drive. You do see J. Cole being a lot more comfortable with himself on Forest Hill Drive, and there is more compelling content. It is kept very tight and cohesive in 13 tracks, and definitely Forest Hill Drive is my pick for the better album between the two. But what are your thoughts? What's your favorite J. Cole album? In my opinion, if I'm to rate them, I'd give Forest Hill Drive a 10 out of 10. Born Sinner, I'd probably give that an 8.5 out of 10. But let me know what your thoughts are on this video. Did you enjoy it? What are your thoughts on the comparison? What other comparisons would you like to see me do next? I think next week I'll be doing Asha's Beautiful Imperfection versus Asha. I think that would be very befitting. So let me know what other projects you'd like me to compare, what other video ideas you may have, and generally what your thoughts are about this video. So if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like. If you're new around here, why not click subscribe, and please feel free to check out some of my other videos. My name is Judge Prime. I hope you have a blessed day, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.